Hello and welcome back to the TV archive. You probably thought we were abandoning this series already, but no, I'm just incredibly slow. Um, I'm joined again for episode 3 by Andrew. Thanks again for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Should be fun to talk about this year. My birth year, so
Oh, there you go. I didn't know that. Won't be getting to my birth year for another 9 years, so just to make you feel a little bit old. Um, but the year in question is 1991, our second full year deep dive. How are you feeling about the year as a whole? Firstly, in comparison to 1990, and secondly, in comparison to what you think is to come.
um, I think I like it better than 1990 from what I had available. I mean, again, not to repeat last week, but I was missing the juggernaut of Twin Peaks. But I think you know the shows that started, they're only getting better at this point. Um, and that'll also probably continue for a few years. So this will be the start of an upward trend for me, but it by no means has peaked yet.
Yeah, I think I mentioned in the 1990 video that Twin Peaks season one is going to take some beating for me in terms of like an individual season. It'll be interesting to see what year it is that is beaten, and it isn't this year. I can give that away already. But I think as an overall year, there is a lot more here for me. I've got honorable mentions this year. Wow, that's a big step for me. And yeah, I think there's a lack of a real standout season for me. Um, which there definitely is one of those in at least the next couple of years. Uh, but the, the ranking the list was really difficult because the difference, honestly, between like number 7 and number 1 is not that big this year for me. So it was a very very fun activity to rank them all. So just a reminder that we are counting the shows for the year that they started, with the exception of if, for example, if a first season of a show that a pilot was in one year and then the rest of the season was the year after. But, you know, you're going to run into examples like Mr. Bean and Batman the Animated Series and SpongeBob where they aired over like 3 years. One season aired over like 3 years. But we're going to stick with that rule just for the sake of consistency. And on the topic of shows beginning, here are some of the big name shows that aired in 1991. Compared to 1990, this is nothing. Like the list we had in 1990 of stuff that was new was crazy. And I think we kind of took it for granted because it was our first year. But we're going to see how important that year was historically more and more as we go through the 90s. Um, but the list of shows I got here, we got Dinosaurs, the family sitcom, Rugrats, which is, you know, a staple of many people's childhood. Doug, the Ren and Stimpy show, Erie, Indiana, and for something completely different, the Jerry Springer show actually debuted in 1991 as well. Um, and then as far as the UK, not as much, but you got two sort of cult comedies in The British Empire and Bottom. So yeah, not as sort of standout, but stuff like Dinosaurs, Rugrats. You got some big name shows there that definitely left an impact.
And for a little tease, I will have another debut you didn't mention on my list.
Oh, wow. My research clearly wasn't thorough enough, or I must have just, because with these I just look at the,
There's only so many you can include, right? So
yeah, true, 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 true. What about some Nielsen ratings? I wanna give you some statistics.
yeah, yeah. Like last time we had Cheers in the top spot, and this time it's Roseanne as the most popular scripted program.
Makes sense.
A whopping 33 million average viewers in that season. Again, would be unheard of today. Murphy Brown is still big as well. Cheers hitting double-digit seasons and still successful. Uh, Home Improvement does huge numbers. For something outside of the sitcom realm, I'd shout out the crime drama Murder She Wrote, which was like well into its run and competing, quite closely with all these shows. So yeah, that kind of is a little glimpse into the picture of what was going on ratings wise.
And it's a good transition into the Emmy winners because the Outstanding Comedy Series winner was Murphy Brown, season 4, um, which is pretty interesting. I've not seen it, so I can't comment on that. However, the
Neither
Outstanding
of I.
Drama Series winner was Northern Exposure, season 3, which I also haven't seen. But I've seen the first 2 seasons. I just ran out of time. Like, I think it's like 24, 45-minute episodes. I just didn't. I was already running late on this, so it might have made my top 5, but it didn't because I didn't watch it. But I did watch season 2, so stay tuned to see if that makes my list. And then, yeah, in terms of missing shows, yeah, for me, it's Northern Exposure season 3 and Erie, Indiana, which was one that really piqued my interest. Interesting premise. One of those cancelled too early shows, but I just didn't. I didn't get to it. What about you? Anything missing that you really wanted to get in there, or are you feeling pretty content?
Um, I was pretty happy with what I had. I mean, a lot of those shows I listed that were huge at the time, I haven't seen. So I guess I don't. I still think Cheers someday is a show that I'll want to run through, even though this was quite late in the game for it. I feel like that's a show that had some potential, to to do pretty well in these years for me.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so I guess I'll go first with my number 5 this time around. Um,
Right.
hitting us with a score of a 7.7. That's right. The average ratings are back. A 7.7 out of 10, which for those of you keeping track would have been enough for number 3 in 1990. So again, the depth of this year is a lot better. And I've got Dinosaurs season 2. So 2 seasons of this show landed in our remit, and this was the last one that I was finishing off. I actually finished it today. Um, it's a deeply socially conscious show, and there's much more to it than you'd assume as an outsider. Of course, the ending is very famous and well known. But what I've found is that that sort of not darkness per se, but dealing with sort of sensitive topics and having this sort of anti capitalist, leftist politics in a lot of it was there from almost the word go, definitely in season 2. You got some true standout episodes like the cheekily titled "What Sexual Harris Meant," which is a whole episode about workplace sexual harassment. In this family sitcom, you got "And the Winner Is," which is all about like politics and sham elections and stuff like that. Fran Live, which is about sort of the spinelessness of TV, and Career Opportunities, which is a real favorite of mine, where the son Robbie goes to the job wizard who assigns him a job, uh, despite knowing him for like 2 seconds that he's going to do for the rest of his life, which is like quite relatable, I think, to a lot of people stuck in jobs that they don't want to be doing. But yeah, it tackles a lot of sensitive topics whilst also being pretty funny and sort of warm and inviting whilst being deeply satirical and dark. It's a really unique show in that sense that it retains its sort of fuzzy tone. But yeah, I've really enjoyed going through it, and I'm excited to watch more of it. It's my number 5 with a 7.7 out of 10.
Nice pick. That was a show where I saw a few episodes growing up. I'm not sure what season it's in, but the Exorcist parody episode, that one really traumatized me as a little kid. Um, but my number 5 is the debut we didn't talk about, but I did talk about it on the ratings, and that was Home Improvement season 1. And I don't know if this is a surprise pick coming from me, but it's a show I enjoyed best kind of in its early days. So stars Tim Allen as Tim the Toolman Taylor. Basic premise is he's balancing his family life, and he also hosts a tool show called Tool Time. Um, I think Tim here is funniest when he's bouncing off his young family of 3 boys, and you do have most of the recurring trends in the show established pretty well from the get go. His accident prone antics. Every episode I'm pretty sure the show that they never do it right. There's always something that goes wrong somewhere along the way. So it's a wonder how it was promoting the tools they were supposed to at all. But uh, you have his going overboard with Christmas lights. That becomes a thing that he would always have going on the series. The only thing it's missing for me is the annual Halloween episode that they would start doing. And you know me, I'm a big Halloween theme guy, so that's probably what held it back from being any higher. But I do think it's a show that kind of knows what it is to start, and I think it's at its best in its early days.
Very nice, very nice. I was aware of that show, and I think at one point it was on my long list. Before I realized just how long it would take to do the watching for these episodes, and I had to really condense them. So yeah, nice to hear some positive things about it. So here I am now with the sun shining in my eyes. My number four, still at a 7.7, with a big old asterisk next to it, is Twin Peaks season two. I got tricked by IMDb. Okay, IMDb told me that season two started in January 1991, which was, I believe, when it aired in the UK, but in the US it also started airing in 1990. Um, this is a weird one because you'll have heard how much I love Twin Peaks in episode one of, well, in the previous episode of this series. And this has my favorite Twin Peaks stuff in it. The first 9 episodes is one of my favorite runs in television. And it culminates in a couple of my favorite ever TV episodes in episode 7, Lonely Souls, and episode 9, Arbitrary Law. But this is a 22 episode season of television. So if you've seen the show, you know why this happens. If you've not seen the show, it's going to be a bit more of a mystery, but there is that stretch from episode 10 to about episode 17 or 18, which is really hard to get through. And rewatching it this time around, I was really, really struggling. Like coming home for a really long day at work and being like, oh man, I've got to watch a couple more episodes of Twin Peaks, which is never what you want, especially a show I love as much as this. And like a few episodes before, from when I was at that point, was one of my favorite episodes in TV history. Um, there's various subplots rather than one overarching plot, which is what it had been doing for the first part of its run, which are each equally bizarre and bland, which is really not what you want. The final 5 or so episodes bring the quality back up without ever reaching its previous highs, but still bring it up to like a solid level. Particularly the presence of Heather Graham was appreciated. I think Annie is a great addition. She has great chemistry with Carmel McLaughlin. And yeah, while this season features the best of Twin Peaks in my mind, it also features the worst. The ups were high enough to get it a spot on this list, but if we were just talking about the first 9 episodes, it would have beat the average of season one, and it would have been the top of this list by a landslide. But unfortunately, um, David Lynch did not get his way at ending it after those 9 episodes, and the network insisted on a 22 episode season. So such is life. And Twin Peaks season two, in many ways, walked so other seasons of television could run later on because it was really badly butchered in a way, but still good overall.
Yeah, I guess that speaks to one of the challenges with like a season of television is like, are you basing it off of the peaks? Are you basing it off of the whole picture? It's easier to do that with like standalone episodes versus ones that carry a narrative over the course of it. So
Yeah.
that's a challenge I'm discovering with this is just how you evaluate the seasons in that way.
Yeah, because if we were just basing it off the highs, this would, like I said, be an easy win for the year. But in terms of the watching experience, it wouldn't be in the top five because you have those amazing highs, and then there's like, I know, like 6 hours of TV that are just like miserable.
Well, uh, I'm going to move forward with maybe a little bit of hot take too, because I have the third season of Seinfeld in my fourth spot. Um, and I usually see this one listed as kind of the first in like the prime Seinfeld years. And for me, it's more of a transition between the early days and the kind of the more exaggerated directions that later episodes might go. You get more colorful side characters, bigger set pieces, more adventurous stories in some episodes. I think it's developing its identity a bit more, um, but not every episode or tangent lands for me here yet. The highlights for sure include some classic episodes, though. The parking garage, the subway, follow in the vein of a season 2 episode that I'll talk about in a bit. And I think my favorite is the cafe, actually, where the Jerry tries to support the new restaurant in town, and meanwhile George is wants Elaine to take his IQ test, and he like passes it out the window. So that's an episode that I always love. So um, I think I think I'll be speaking more favorably about Seinfeld from here for a long while to come. For me, this is a season. If you're just basing it off of the best episodes, it would sit really favorably. Um, but it was a little bit more inconsistent for me than some of the other ones I have to talk about for this year to come.
Yeah, I'm not going to talk about it yet, but I mostly agree with what you said. Um, and the cafe has one of my favorite, like, simple Kramer moments when he like grabs the hot towel and he like puts and like backflips for no reason. Oh, it's so good. Um, but yeah, well, we'll get to Seinfeld season 3 in a bit for me. My number 3 is a show I mentioned as one of the debuts, and it is Bottom Series 1, which scores an 8.0 out of 10. So pretty impressive. Would have been enough to get the number 2 spot in 1990. Again, we're dealing with better depth here, I think. Only 6 episodes, but for a British sitcom, that's pretty normal. I'd mentioned in our pilot episode that I'm a huge Rick Mayall fan, both from his cameos in Blackadder and his leading role in The Young Ones. So it made sense that I would check out his and Adrian Edmondson's other most famous project, Bottom. And I like it more than The Young Ones, actually, based on series 1 alone. And I'm definitely going to be checking out the other 2 series. It's sort of a mix of slapstick silliness and very sharp and clever humor. It's almost perfectly my kind of comedy, that sort of balance between the really dumb and really smart at the same time. I think it's something that classic Simpsons nails really well. Um, Adrian Edmondson is great in this, but Rick Mayall is the star of the show. My favorite episode has got to be the Gas Man episode, kind of iconic. The shenanigans that they get into in that episode, sort of very well observed, and less extreme versions of these people exist in the real world, which I always appreciate in a sitcom. So gets the bronze medal for 1991, and maybe a show you'll be hearing about more in the years to come.
And that's one that's not familiar to me, but I am curious to see where that one goes for you if it makes an appearance again. Um, my third, and this is probably why I said my Seinfeld pick was a hot take, because I actually have the second season of Seinfeld in the third spot. They both have the 1991 debut, and like I think it's definitely an unpopular opinion to put the second above the third. It has less episodes, generally considered the less iconic of the two, but for me, this one just really flows nicely as a watch. I really had a good time the last time I ran through it, and I guess I appreciate more of the groundedness that it has. Um, Obviously, certain situations still kind of get the absurdity element to it, but they tend to be based on really simple things. I really love the pony remark. The phone message is such a great episode. And of course, the Chinese restaurant, which is to me like the ultimate TV bottle episode taking place in one location. So I didn't really foresee having the second above the third, but the more I looked at the episodes and kind of went through my experience going through them, that's the way it landed. So yeah, season 2 of Seinfeld in the third spot.
Yeah, I don't agree on your order of the two of them, but I will say I think season 2 is more consistent. I think Yeah, well, my number two is Seinfeld season three, so we can go directly into this discussion, and it's an 8.0 again. So just giving it the edge over bottom mainly because of those amazing highlight episodes. I think, yeah, if we're talking about like, because Seinfeld season two is only like 12 episodes or something, isn't it? So season
Yeah.
three is like double the length almost. And I think if we're judging the first half of season three against all of season two, I think it's pretty much a tie. I might lean season two actually, but I think the back half of Seinfeld season three really the consistency starts. You also get the more overt serial nature of it, where there's like elements continuing from week to week, which then really kick off in the start of season four, where they really sort of hone in on that. Um, and yeah, because my favorite episode from season two is probably the jacket. That's really great with Lawrence Tierney's guest appearance. But I think there are like 5 or 6 episodes in season three that I like more than my favorite episode in season two, personally. And the two that I really want to stand out, mention as standouts, which are you haven't mentioned either of them, funnily enough, are the library with Philip Baker Hall's incredible cameo guest appearance in like 3 scenes. He absolutely steals the episode. And the limo as well, which I think from what I've seen so far is my favorite of their like bottle episodes. Um I just love how absurd that gets and like splitting. I always think putting George and Jerry together and Elaine and Kramer together is a great sort of combination because the way Elaine just reacts to the things Kramer says always cracks me up. So yeah, I don't think it's quite as good as it would become. I think season four immediately afterwards is a big step up. But I think this is the first season where they know exactly what they want the four main characters to be, even if their interpersonal relationships aren't quite as fine tuned as they would be later on. They're getting there. And yeah, it's really funny and still relatively grounded for the most part. So that's why it's my number two.
Yeah, more than fair comments on that. Um, so that leaves me with two left, and I have another debut for my second pick, and that is Rugrats. So here's like a series from my childhood that I think holds up quite well. And for anyone not familiar, the premise is basically animated show from the perspective of like these inquisitive babies who can talk to each other but not to the adults. Oftentimes you'll get them treating mundane life situations as these big unknown adventurers, and they don't know any better, so they have all these rumors of what they could be. Meanwhile, the adults are oblivious, and I think the show's good for infusing some nice humor for older audiences too, to appreciate the series. The parents, the characters, they're quite funny in their dysfunction, and there's like a weird style to the animation that exaggerates and distorts the scenarios quite effectively, in my opinion. You get a lot of unusual choices with the art direction too, like canted angles, surreal dream sequences, like these bold POV shots. And I think with the music, it has this interesting vibe where it's like somewhere teetering between eerie and wholesome. And I don't know, sometimes it's just kind of it lulls you into this like fever dream at times. For checking out just one in this season, I'd probably say Candy Bar Creep Show, which was one I watched endlessly as a kid. Um, Basically, they set up a haunted house in their garage. So I mentioned on the Halloween guy, there's a very formative, formative episode for me in that. So
Yeah, great. I mean, when I was thinking about like shows from my childhood, when I was making my watch list for all these years, um, The Simpsons was an immediate one, SpongeBob, Futurama, Rocko's Modern Life, even from like a bit of an earlier era than a couple of those. And Rugrats was one that kind of just slipped my mind. I don't know if I just assumed that it wouldn't hold up or I don't know what it was, but I just never even considered it. But now you've put it so high on your list, I'm thinking I should give it a chance as an adult. Yeah. So I'm just going to hit you with my honorable mentions now, which I have some this year, which is very exciting, and I will do for every year from this point onwards. I will make sure of it. Um, I want to give a mention, at least, to the first season of Dinosaurs, which is only 5 episodes. Doesn't really feature any classics. It's good, but wasn't really in danger of troubling the list. But the two seasons that I really want to give a shout out to are Northern Exposure season 2, which scored a 7.6 out of 10 for me, so just missed out. Only 7 episodes, and doesn't really have an episode as good as the season 1 finale, but I thought the sort of the running storylines throughout the season were pretty well done. Um, but yeah, I enjoyed the show, but not enough to make me want to sit through a 25 episode, 45-minute an episode season. Just the nature of shows and TV back then is that you're going to get those ridiculously long seasons, and you really have to justify, like, you really have to be loving something to stick through with it for those sort of lengths. And then also Seinfeld season 2 was my number 6. Also with a 7.7, so it was technically tied with Twin Peaks and Dinosaurs, but just misses my list partly for the sake of variety, so I could have different shows, but also because, yeah, compared to those two seasons, I think it's more a consistent ride than one with great peak episodes that I remember really liking, aside from um, the jacket and the Chinese restaurant, which would be my favorite ones for sure. What about you? Honorable mentions?
Yeah, so I had about five that I could call to mind that I could consider for this list. Um, I feel if we got more seasons from like Full House and Coach, which wouldn't be shows I would expect to land on my list, but I remember them. Tales from the Crypt has a third season here. I don't think it's nearly as good as the second, but there are a couple episodes that really stand out there. Fresh Prince of Bel Air season 2, pretty solid follow up. The first one made my number 5 in 1990. Maybe this one has slightly fewer highs to that one. And then the final season of Growing Pains, which is uneven, but I always really liked the multi episode storyline with a really young Leonardo DiCaprio. So that always made an impact on me as far as that show goes. But yeah, those are the other ones that I considered. And there's one big one missing that I'll be talking about in my number one.
I have a feeling you might not be the only one. So my number one, and might be Andrew's number one, we'll see, is The Simpsons season 3, scoring an 8.1 out of 10. So just edging out in front, but deservedly so. It's hard to go wrong with The Simpsons in this era, which is something we're both going to say a lot. Like Seinfeld, I think the best is yet to come. But this features some absolutely phenomenal all-timer episodes in the mix. Homer at the Bat and Radio Bart are probably the most obvious ones to me. But you also got Simpson and Delilah and Flaming Moe's, as well as some other classics as well. You've got sort of retaining the domestic storylines and the wholesomeness of the early years, whilst also increasing the amount of quick-fire jokes. I think this is something I pointed out to you. One of the things to me this season is most notable for is having some amazing original songs. You got Talking Softball, you got Flaming Moe's, you got Sending Our Love Down the Well, you got Happy Birthday Lisa. Just off the top of my head. um, so yeah, I think it's a worthy winner in 91. It might end up being one of my weaker years throughout my weaker winners throughout this series. Um, like I said, there's not much separating like number 1 and number 7 this year for me. It's all just a lot of really good shows. Um, but yeah, I think at least season 4 is better for me for The Simpsons, just like with Seinfeld, which is going to make 1992 very interesting because they're going to be going head to head. Two seasons, arguably put up by a lot of people as both shows' best seasons. So that's going to be a very interesting battle. But yeah, Simpsons season 3, it's probably the first year where it feels like what we think of when we think of classic Simpsons, because season 2 is kind of its own thing. emotionally and comedically in a lot of ways. Whereas I think season three kind of represents where it'd go from seasons four through eight or nine or 10, wherever you want to cut it off, of that sort of like real, um, sort of fast paced stories, fast paced jokes. And also, still in season three, they were still introducing a lot of new characters, which are iconic to us now, but it's kind of funny watching it for the first time. I was like, oh, so this is the first appearance of like this character? That's really strange that it's taken this long for them to be brought into it. So yeah, Simpsons season three was the winner this year. Really like it, even though I think that The Simpsons has better seasons overall.
Yeah, probably no surprise. That's also my number one pick. Wasn't really in doubt. Uh, Maybe less consistent even than season two in a way, but I think it makes up for it with the higher highs, and it really packs like an extra comedic punch, pushes the madness a little bit more while still overall fitting in that like irreverent animated sitcom realm. And like I feel like Springfield for the most part still has like a level of sanity to it going on here, but you do get more, cutaways, parodies, absurd jokes kind of interspliced in episodes. They're branching out a little bit more into Springfield with episodes showcasing secondary characters, classic episodes that don't really need much introduction, like you mentioned, like Flaming Moe's, Radio Bart. I also think there's like some underrated character ones, like Bart the Lover, the episode where he poses as a secret admirer for his teacher. Um, and there's another episode that I might have a few more words to say about shortly as well. So I'm not done talking Simpsons just yet.
Well, episode of the year was one of the more interesting battles for me. It was a three-way battle. I kind of knew what my number one was going to be, but I had three 10 out of 10 episodes this season. Well, more than that because Twin Peaks had two, so four total, but three fighting against each other, if you see what I mean. And so I want to give honorable mentions to both the limo from Seinfeld and Homer at the Bat from The Simpsons. But my winner is Arbitrary Law, Twin Peaks season two, episode nine. Kind of the beginning of the end of, well, not even the beginning, the end of the end of Twin Peaks' golden initial sort of 17 episode run. Um, it has all of my favorite side characters in it, like Albert and the Horn brothers and Leland Palmer, and it has a great atmosphere, the sort of the thunder and lightning night, the sort of the detective story nature of it. There's a lot of like very strange, whimsical moments that really work. Yeah, there's not much I can say because a lot of discussion of this episode is very spoiler heavy, but yeah, it's a real juggernaut. On my first watch, it really got me quite emotional watching this episode. So yeah, it's kind of feels like a series finale, even though it's not a series finale. But yeah, Arbitrary Law, fantastic episode of television, probably in my top 15 episodes of TV of all time, 20 maybe. I think it's that good.
And do you think if you had the second season in 1990, that episode would have been your pick for that year as well?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Even though I do
Yeah,
love the episode from season one, yeah, it would have been my win. And then Homer at the Bat would have won for 91, which
right.
would have made for a cool moment right now, right?
Yeah, nice segue to my pick, Homer at the Bat from third season of The Simpsons. Probably one of my favorite episodes of one of my favorite kind of runs of seasons of a show. It's just a really fun, like gag fest type episode. You have the nuclear power plant with a softball team, Homer enjoying a lot of success with his lucky bat, and then in an effort to win a bet, Burns hires like all these professional baseball players to like stack the roster. Um, but then championship game approaching, strange and absurd fate starts to befall one by one. and all the different things they have go wrong, from like the radiation poisoning to like assisting at a house fire, another dimension, a disagreement over sideburns. I just love how diverse and how absurd all these things happen, and it just brings a smile to my face. And I don't think they ever did a more masterful job than this episode of just integrating all these celebrity guests, because they get the real baseball players playing themselves here, and just saying like ridiculous lines and being in ridiculous situations, and then they close it out with like a really cool parody song about softball. So yeah, to me it's like one of the perfect just like comedy episodes of The Simpsons.
Mike Shosha's tragic illness made us smile. That line in the song, it makes me laugh every time. It's so dumb, but what an episode. And yeah, I'm midway through season 5 on my current Simpsons watch, and that's still my favorite episode. So it's definitely a strong runner-up to Arbitrary Law. And my performance of the year goes to Ray Wise as Leland Palmer in Twin Peaks. I also gave it to a Twin Peaks performance last year, but it was to Carl McLaughlin. This time around, it's to Ray Wise, the father of the deceased Laura Palmer, whose death sort of springs off the events of the show. And Ray Wise's performance throughout the show is really incredible because he has to juggle so many different states of mind and emotions. And there are times where he's really funny. There are times where he's like pathetic. There are times where he's, you know, portraying other things. Again, don't want to reveal too much about the character because it's one of the most fascinating things about the show. But he really gets to shine in season 2, and is one of the real bright spots of a very inconsistent season. He was great in season 1 as well, but from his first entrance in, in the premiere episode where he sings Mersey Dotes and Ben Horn and Jerry Horn start dancing around the room, and Jerry Horn does the worm. It's this such a bizarre comedic scene, but Ray Wise really gave it his all in this role, and I couldn't in good faith pick anyone else, even though Michael Richards really comes into his own as Kramer in this season of Seinfeld. But Ray Wise was always going to be my pick.
One of these days I'll see Twin Peaks and it'll all fall into place for me. Uh, for mine, I thought about doing like in 1990. I basically was representing the entire Mr. Bean show. I thought about doing like a regular character to represent for this year, but ultimately I'm going to go with a one episode performance, which is Kirk Douglas in the episode Yellow of Tales from the Crypt. And I mentioned how I didn't think this season was overall nearly as strong as the first two, but this episode to close it out was a real standout, and it's basically like a mini movie. It was originally produced as part of a pilot for another anthology show that wasn't picked up, and so then they reworked it into this one, which is probably why it's so much more serious than you usually expect from that series. And it's directed by Robert Zemeckis, so the talent on board for this is off the charts. But yeah, I'm highlighting Kirk Douglas. He plays like this assured, no nonsense general in World War I, and he's leading the charge of his team toward German lines. And he has like this reluctant lieutenant son, played by Kirk's real life son, Eric Douglas. And so basically, the whole idea is when the lieutenant shows cowardice and leaves his men behind and then lies about it, the general is faced with this decision, like, what's he going to do with this? So he ends up charging his son with treason. And for the rest of the episode, there's a twist that I won't dare reveal here, but Kirk really brings like this sternness and pride and severity to his position that really makes the role and the role shine and the predicament that he's in really land. And the story, like it carries some of Kirk's own classic film Paths of Glory as well. So there's some nice kind of nods to that as well. It may only be one episode, but it's cinematic, and in the way that I think a lot of the best TV will, as we go forward in these years, will strive to achieve more and more of that cinematic feel. So I thought that's a good shout out there for performance, Kirk Douglas.
Yeah, you've really between this episode and the last one made me want to watch at least a few episodes of Tales from the Crypt, the ones you've highlighted, because it sounds like something I would get a lot out of. So there's 1991 in the bag. How are you feeling about 1992? Have you had a chance to have a look, or do you have any general preconceptions going into it?
I think it'll, based on what I've seen, I'm comfortable saying it'll probably be my favorite of the ones we've had so far. You'll probably count on some repeats that are pretty obvious. I think you've mentioned them already as well. Like a lot of these shows, they continue to get better. The ones that are favorites already, they're coming into their own more and more. And maybe no better the case than in '92. So I think it'll be probably my top one.
Yeah, it's gonna the ones that I'd sort of highlighted as big years in the sort of first half of the decade were 92 and 94. Um, so I'm intrigued to see how my list takes shape in 92. I already have a couple seasons in there and I'm gonna have to do some watching, so it might be another month or so before we get the next episode out, but whatever. That's the pace we're setting. I'd rather do a good job of this and make sure I'm touching all the bases I want to touch, rather than just like, here's a list. Um,
Yeah,
so yeah, I think I agree with what you're saying. The big shows are still improving, and you could argue that they reach a peak in 92. We'll see if either of us think that way, but people do definitely have those opinions. And also some new names yet to emerge, which will be emerging next year, which will be exciting to add them to the mix. Because it does feel like this year we were talking a lot about shows we've already talked about, and I'm sure we will be next year as well. But I think there's going to be some new contenders to throw a spanner in the works, maybe.
definitely.
So that's it for 1991. Let us know what your favorite seasons of TV from 1991 are. Do you agree with us that The Simpsons season three is as good as it gets? I'm sure some of you will and some of you won't. But we'd love to hear any comments. Please do share this video, um, share it around. Want to get people involved and watching and following along. But from me and Andrew, we will see you next time in the year of 1992.